Hi, and welcome back to Module 3 of Ethical Influence, where we're going to learn all about what already influences us, right? And yes, by us, I mean you, I mean me, I mean all human beings, right? Because as we've previously established, that's who we're seeking to influence, right? Other human beings and hopefully ourselves as well. So I want to start with this quote, which I've paraphrased. I heard it first, personally, from Tony Robbins, although I'm sure it's, much older. Basically, the only way to truly influence someone is to understand and align with what already influences them, okay? Now, this approach is so innately, I would say, superior to other approaches because for many reasons. For a start, it makes things so much easier. So many of us who have struggled with influence, I think we see influence as a battle, maybe as a zero-sum game where someone has to win and so in order for someone to win, someone has to lose, right? And that's absolutely not what influence is about. Now, of course, we have already defined influence in great detail in Module 2, right? So you get that influence is not about getting people to do what they don't want to do, right? And so in order to influence the real way, the right way, and in fact also the more powerful way, the easier way, the quicker way, so these are all the benefits of this system, right? Now, even if we're trying to help the other person, if we don't get this, if we're still talking to them in terms of what we think should influence them or what we would like to have influence them. So for instance, if we want to influence someone to, for instance, sign up for a coaching program with us because we know it's going to be of benefit to them, obviously otherwise we wouldn't even consider such a thing, based on what they have told us, then we might be tempted to speak to them in our terms, right? So hopefully we're not going to be so self-absorbed or selfish to, speak in terms of, I think you should sign up for a coaching package with me because my rent needs paying and I really would like, we get that, right? We get that we need to speak to the other person in terms of the benefits to them, not, like why it's good for us, right? I'm sure you get that. But there's another level to that, right? Now, even if you get that you've got to talk to them in terms of benefits to them, it's still very easy to misunderstand the other person. And the reason for that is because most of us have very faulty beliefs, ideas, notions about why we do what we do, like why if I had faulty beliefs, and I'm sure still do have faulty beliefs as to why I do what I do, and you have faulty beliefs as to why you do what you do, and the people who you deal with are going to have faulty beliefs as to why they do what they do, right? So because of that, when we're trying to influence someone, we need to understand why people really do what we do, right? And so the place that we want to start is understanding, okay? Once you truly understand what you are, which we'll cover in a second, and why you do what you do, and what other human beings are, and why they do what they do, this will become easy. And so rather than a difficult form of influence, where you're trying to convince someone of something, where you're trying to persuade someone of something, when you're trying to battle someone into giving in or seeing it from your point of view, right? I think this is often what I see the mistake people making. They think that influence is about getting other people to see it from their point of view. Do you see my point of view? This is really important to us for understandable reasons. But it's not what influence is about. Influence is not about, it's not fundamentally about getting the other person to see things from your point of view, right? What is it about? It's about this, right? To understand and align with, so what do you align with? Your product or service in the case of sale, right? The pitch for your religion in the case of religion. The pitch for your, what you're trying to get them to do as a manager or leader in terms of management and leadership, right? Your pitch as a seducer or seductress, right? If that's the reason why you're trying to influence. We cover this in Module 2, right? But for whatever reason you're trying to influence, we want to understand what already truly influences someone, and once we understand it, we can align with it, right? So it's not about getting people to see it our way or forcing other people to realize that we're right or any of this kind of thing, or persuading them that they're right. I even think that the word persuasion, it has a kind of slightly hostile, confrontational kind of maybe tone to it, which is just not necessary. That's not what we're talking about here, right? We're just understanding what already motivates someone, really, not what they think usually motivates them, but what actually motivates them, and then align with it, okay? So what you're going to learn about in this lesson, and probably also the next one even, is just understand, because this is the most important thing of all right? We're going to need to do some learning, but in the process of that, we're also going to need to do some unlearning. We already started the unlearning at the end of module 2, right? But we're going to do some more here as well. And we're going to learn about what really motivates us. So, first of all, let's look at what you are. So what are you? All right, we covered this a little bit at the end of module 2. What you actually are is a mammal, right? You're a mammal, okay? I used to use the word chimp or primate, but I think the only problem with that is that that's a specific type of mammal that technically, or at least in the case of chimp, we're not, you know, although we are more similar to chimps and primates of various kinds than we are any other mammal. Nonetheless, we are our own unique type of mammal, right? But we are still ultimately a mammal. So we are a special or unusual version, right? We are unique. We are, as I say, special, you know, good special, bad special. That's a matter of opinion. I will show you my opinion of that much later, but that's a matter of opinion. But we are special, we are unusual, we are different. But nonetheless, here's the key thing to understand. All of what motivates, stroke influences you is the same as any other mammal, right? There may be other stuff on top of that. There may be. So because you are, because there is something unusual about you as a human being as compared to any other mammal, there may be something in addition, but it does not replace everything that already motivates all mammals. It is only in addition to it. It's only on top of it, right? And this fundamental fact is reflected in our structure of our brain, right? So we have our very simplified version again, right? You know, I'm not a neuroscientist, but very simply, we have our reptilian brain, which is the brain stem, more at the back and in the middle. And then we have our mammalian brain, which is more in the middle, the emotion. So there's the instinctual part, the reptilian part, with the more emotional part, the mammalian part. And I've just, for the sake of simplicity, lumped those two together, right? So the mammal basically is the reptile and the mammal, right? Because all mammals also have the reptilian part of the brain. All right, and so this is the thing to understand, right? So the reptiles have just the reptilian part, and then when you are a mammal, then you also have the mammalian part, and then you know, primates have the more developed cortex, and then human beings, we're unusual because we have this much bigger extra cortex, especially the frontal cortex, on top of everything else. But it's not a replacement, okay? It's only an addition, and in fact, the cortex, while very important and interesting and unusual and all the rest of it, and we'll talk about it, it doesn't fundamentally make much difference as to our actual motivation, right? So in terms of what influences us, it's still the same thing as before. It's still the mammalian part of the brain, and it's still the reptilian part of the brain, all right? This frontal part is not the influencer. Does that make sense, right? So we've lumped those two terms together, and we're just going to call out the mammal, right? So you are a mammal. Yes, you are something else as well. You also have this unusual thing that no other mammals have, but you are primarily a mammal, right? So it's an issue of first terms, right? So for instance, if you may be a mother, you may be a wife, you may be a daughter, you may be a graphic designer, you may be a pedestrian on a road. Do you know what I mean? You might have lots of titles, but still, you know, before that, you are fundamentally a woman, right? Maybe, probably, depending on, you know, who you are, or you're fundamentally a man. Now, before that, more primarily than being a man or a woman, you are a human, right? And so what I'm saying is, even more primarily than that, you know, irrespective of being a human or any other type of mammal, you are a mammal. Okay? Does that make sense? Are you with me? Okay. Now, this is obviously a very kind of scientific, rational, modern, and some would say maybe atheist, non-spiritual, non-religious, non-esoteric perspective, right? Or is it? So that's the thing I want to ask you to look at. So if you have resistance to this because you have certain religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, or esoteric beliefs, I would encourage you to realize that they are not mutually exclusive, right? Now, it may be that you have beliefs that are religious or spiritual or esoteric, which are inaccurate, And in that case, you probably want to let go of them, but not because they are religious, spiritual, esoteric, but simply because they're inaccurate, right? All beliefs are inaccurate. We want to get rid of, right? We want to know the truth, okay? However, what I'm trying to say is they're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, once I go through the whole system right at the end, I'll show you how the modern scientific cutting edge, what sounds very evolutionary materialistic way of looking at what humans are, which is what you're going to learn in great detail, it actually reflects what ancient societies and civilizations, going as far back as we know of, thought of human beings all along, right? So even though we have new terminology and we have new ways of understanding and we now have tools to dissect and measure and all the rest of it that are different from before, I just want to reassure you that fundamentally what I'm going to share you is not, it doesn't preclude the spiritual dimension. It doesn't preclude the esoteric dimension or the religious dimension, whichever of those you're interested in, or all of them, right? So please bear with me on that. So what you're going to learn is very, very materialistic, but it doesn't necessarily invalidate any spiritual, religious, or esoteric truths, right? Like with every truth, it only invalidates things that are not true, not things that are true. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so why is this perspective so powerful? Why are we going to focus on this perspective primarily when it comes to influence, as opposed to any other? I just want to preview this by saying that over the last 15 years of deep and intense study into human nature and why we do what we do in all kinds of fields, in many religions, in many spiritual systems, in many esoteric systems, many different psychological systems, many different mythological systems, sociological, anthropological, all kinds of systems I've learned, all kinds of perspective, all kinds of ways of looking at human beings and why we do what we do. Why this one? Why am I encouraging you to focus primarily on this one? Okay, so here are 3 good reasons. Well, number one, because if you embrace this particular perspective, you're going to get a very high degree of clarity about human beings, right? Whereas at the moment, you may not admit it, but to some degree you may be confused by human behavior, or you may be upset by human behavior, or you may feel that human behavior is contradictory, or paradoxical, or bad, or wrong, or basically, yeah, if it's confusing to you, or frustrating, or anything like that, if you basically ever feel like, I don't get it, right? Then the value of this particular perspective is that you will get it. It all makes sense. And even as I go through it, I'm going to give you some obvious objections, and I'm going to respond to them. But it's going to take a while. So if you have objections, of course, you can ask them underneath the video. If you have objections or questions, you can ask them underneath the video. You can ask them on the coaching call. We'll get them all resolved. But what you'll see, the more that you embrace this with an open mind, is that it has an extraordinary ability to give you clarity. Now, bear in mind, the human mind has a tendency to justify whatever it believes. So even the most ridiculous beliefs, you will find people who manage to find huge amounts of evidence to justify and support that, right? So just clarity isn't enough, because there definitely is such a thing as delusional clarity. So the other benefit, or one of the other main benefits, is the ability of this particular perspective to predict what people will do, right? It's very easy to go back in time and go, oh, this person did this because they're a Scorpio, because they had a bad childhood, because, because of their genetics, because of the country that they live in, because of whatever, right? Because of whatever explanatory model you used to, because they are an INTJ, because, whatever, right? All of these different systems. So, all of that is very well and fair enough, but the reason why I love this explanatory model so much is because, and this is why I love marketing so much these days as opposed to personal development, although I also love personal development, of course, but what I love about it in contrast is that whereas personal development is just full of all kinds of theories that have no basis in reality, marketing deals in hard facts, right? So if a perspective as to, or at least good marketing, proper marketing, not all marketing, you'll learn more about that later if you do marketing with me, but proper marketing, good marketing is all about hard facts. And so my point is that it's very easy to use perspective to kind of go back and go, oh, well, this is why this person did this. But if you can't use it to predict what a person will do accurately, very well, then its value to you is minimal, right? It's just more you justifying a belief. So the wonderful thing about this is it doesn't just bring crystal clarity, it allows you to predict what people will do. One of the best arguments against conspiracy theories that I've ever heard is that every conspiracy theorist who comes up, no matter how crazy their idea or justified, I mean, I'm sure they're not all wrong, but no matter how far-fetched their idea is, they always find evidence for it, right? They always find ways and reasons to justify it. If you read conspiracy theorists, and I've read a lot of them for a long time, what you will notice though is that their ability to predict what will happen in the future is shockingly bad. Like they are pretty much always wrong. Like occasionally they get a few details right, but like overall, one of the things that they're very commonly predicted is like catastrophes and apocalypses and major transformative occurrences and all the rest of it. Those never happen, right? So that's one example that's kind of obvious, but even down to all kinds of levels, right? So almost every perspective on why people do what they do has a low predictability power in reality, right? This one is powerful in that if you really get it, you really embrace it, you will be able to not only get why people have done what they have already done, but you will be able to accurately predict what they will do in any given circumstance. Now, we're not robots, we're not mechanical, it's not 100%, but while it's the same in science, in the quantum state, like if you zoom into the smallest level, the behavior of subatomic particles is so random, it's unpredictable. But if you zoom out to the biggest level and you focus on like the stars, the behavior of them is entirely predictable, right? So the more zoomed in you are, the more unpredictable things are. The more zoomed out you are, the more utterly predictable things are. Well, it's exactly the same with human behavior. It's difficult to predict with 100% accuracy what any one individual will do. But if you get a group of 1,000 people or even 1 million people, you can predict exactly what they will do with great accuracy. And all kinds of people do, from marketing agencies to government agencies to big corporations, stunningly accurate predictions because and to the degree that they understand why people really do what they do, which is what we're going to learn here. And then, of course, because this is a course on influence, not just understanding people, the main value of this perspective is results, right? It just simply works, okay? And this explanatory model is one that I've come across many times before. First time maybe 15 years ago. But what is interesting to me is I realize it's the one most beloved of the most powerful influencers that I know, right? The people who are way better than me, the people way more experienced than me. This is pretty much what I'm going to lay out for you now is pretty much what they all believe. They don't all admit it, but especially behind closed doors in private, among their smallest elite in group or whatever, this is always ultimately the way that they think. So, what actually motivates us? Okay, so yes, you, me, but not just you and me, everyone, right? 2 primary factors: survival and reproduction. Now, that may be a little bit disappointing. You're like, oh, Elwin, that old chestnut, I've heard that before. But bear with me, okay, right? So first of all, we just want to clarify. So survival and reproduction, we're not talking so much about your survival and your reproduction. In fact, you are programmed to kind of self-destruct on a cellular and genetic level. So we're talking about the survival and reproduction of your DNA, okay? And so again, with reproduction, this is more focused generally of the female, but within mammals, but really of both ultimately. It's not just like having babies, it's making sure that those babies survive long enough to have babies themselves, right? Who then survive long enough to have babies themselves, So it's the ongoing process of reproduction, right? And keeping ourselves long enough, alive and long enough to be able to do that. Not just to have a baby, but get a baby to the point where the baby can have a baby, right? That's the driving force of all mammals, right? Now, so that's probably, okay, you've heard that before, right? Bear with me. So, the primary thing that motivates us, however, right, the primary thing that motivates us, because you've got to ask, then what about suicide, Elwin? You know, what about condoms? What about suicide bombers? What about wars where you know, no one, you know, where the survival and reproduction is, you know, reduced? What about self-destructive behavior like smoking, right? That doesn't support survival or reproduction, right? So there's loads of things that human beings do that doesn't seem to support survival and reproduction, right? So it seems like a kind of BS argument under even the most cursory of examinations, right? So that's what I say. I'm not telling you the same old BS. I'm getting to the truth here, right? So what we need to understand is the primary thing that motivates us, right? So this is the big picture. But in the real sense, the primary thing that motivates us is our own biochemistry, right? And our biochemistry is designed to enforce the primary agenda of our DNA, okay? So I realize this is a bit of a funny way of looking at it, but just bear with me, right? So there's you and there's what you want, right? The you that you think of as you. And you may not be interested in reproduction because, I don't know, you don't want to. And you may not be interested in survival because you're feeling suicidal, you're feeling self-destructive, or you're feeling life is hopeless or meaningless or whatever, right? So there may well be a you that isn't interested in either of those things, or it's certainly not interested in the second one anyway. So how is it then that you will probably do both of these anyway, right? Well, that's because the primary agenda of your DNA, which is survival and reproduction, right? So your DNA motivates you to meet its primary agenda with your own biochemistry, okay? So what does that mean? Go on with the explanation. So yes, we are wired to survive, right? And most importantly, to DNA, replicate, but the mechanism that DNA uses for that, to get us to do that, is and not just us, all mammals, right? Because again, you know, you see a nature documentary and like, oh, you know, the bear or the fox or the cheetah is preparing to reproduce, you know. But the cheetah probably isn't thinking, I want to reproduce, or it probably isn't even feeling, I want to reproduce, right? So with all mammals, including us, start again, the mechanism that DNA uses for that is a biochemically enforced carrot and stick, right? So what do I mean by carrot and stick, right? Reward and punishment, right? So when we follow the agenda of our DNA, our wiring is such, I'm going to clarify this, so that when we follow the agenda of our DNA, we are biochemically rewarded, and when we do not follow the agenda of our DNA, we are biochemically punished. Now, in case this is starting to sound like sinister or anything like that, bear in mind that, you know, this is what keeps you alive. This is what has kept the whole human race alive. This is what has kept probably all life on the planet alive that we know of, right? All organic life, all life that contains DNA, which is all life that we have any proven experience of. So, like, without this system, there would be no life on Earth, okay? So, as much as I'm making it sound a little bit sinister because I want you to realize what's going on, like, fundamentally, you know, this is not a bad thing. This is just the way that things are, right? So a biochemically enforced carrot and stick. So very simply, basically, we are designed to seek, number one, good feelings, right? Number one, we are designed to seek good feelings, right? And we are designed to avoid bad feelings, right? To further the agenda of our DNA. Okay, so we'll get a little bit more into what that means, good feelings or bad feelings, right? But basically, we are pre-wired to follow through with the agenda of our DNA, and the reward for doing so is good feelings, and the punishment for doing so is bad feelings. Make sense so far? So far, so good. Yeah, I know that still doesn't explain suicide, that still doesn't explain smoking, that still doesn't explain birth control. Right? We'll get there, okay? But for now, understand that that's our basic wiring. And that basically works, right? Overall. Now at this point, for those of you who are kind of into psychology, I'll just do a brief digression, which I hope is helpful for everyone. Am I saying that all of life is only hedonistic, right? Am I saying it's only about feeling pleasure and about avoiding pain, right? This is kind of the classic Freudian perspective of life from psychotherapy. That was then kind of supplanted for a while by the kind of Adlerian perspective, I believe, although people like Nietzsche were saying it before Freud, that life is not all about feeling good, life is all about power. It's all about, power, basically. And then there is also the perspective that I enjoy from Viktor Frankl, which is actually life is not about pleasure or about power, it's about finding meaning, right? Although he does admit that is a uniquely human capacity and not part of the mammalian part of us, right? Here's the thing, right? When I say good feelings and bad feelings, I'm just doing my best to speak in terms which are the most helpful and the most simple, right? So why would some people smoke, right? Even though ultimately that's going to create a bad feeling, right? Well, it creates some kind of good feeling, but then why do some people cut themselves, right? That doesn't make much sense. Why do some people commit suicide, right? That certainly wouldn't seem to, bring about good feelings. Why do some people torture themselves in the head with repeating horrible things that have happened to them over and over again, right? So there are answers to these questions. Bear with me, right? But understand just for now that when I say this, I'm not precluding the other theories, right? If we have a perspective that life is more all about power, like Nietzsche, then the good feeling would be power and the bad feeling would be helplessness. So it still fits in, right? If we believe life is all about meaning, then the good feeling would be meaningfulness, purpose, value, and the bad feeling would be a feeling of meaninglessness, hopelessness, emptiness, futility, kind of existential emptiness, right? Do you see what I'm saying? But it all fits into there. So whatever perspective, right? I'm not talking about simple, pleasure, pain. I'm not talking about hedonism. I'm talking about whatever your definition of good feelings and bad feelings is. Okay? Make sense? Okay, so let's continue. So our wiring is, and here's a challenge that we really need to understand. Our wiring is designed for survival and reproduction. That's the purpose of it. That's what we're pre-wired for. We're not pre-wired to experience lasting peace, happiness, well-being, and you could put in pretty much any other feeling good word, We're not pre-programmed to experience ongoing joy, ongoing, anything, right? Now, why? First of all, let's look at, what the cause of that is. So that's why bad feelings are ever present and long-lasting, right? While good feelings are short-lasting and difficult to get. This is the subject of much philosophizing. As long as human beings have been philosophizing, this is the story of much, poetry and all that kind of thing. The story of many stories. The theme of many stories. Why is it that pain and fear and struggle and all these kind of things are more enduring? And why is it that feeling good, pleasure, joy, happiness, love tend to be more short-lived, right? Why is that? And so this is like a great struggle for us on an individual level, and then also for our race. Interestingly enough, this is a question that's becoming more and more relevant and apparent, because in the past it kind of made sense that we were suffering a lot of the time because we were struggling just to survive. Recently, especially over the last 100 years or so, the world is more abundant than it's ever been from a survival and reproductive perspective. People are living longer than they ever have done. People are reproducing more than they ever have done. People have more access to food, shelter, clothing, energy, information, education, connection, travel, and all of these things, comforts, right? And all of these things that should make us happy. And yet we find that our wiring is the same, right? We experience brief pleasure, and then we kind of go back to focusing on what's wrong. We get anxious, we worry, and all of this kind of thing, right? And so we can kind of tear ourselves apart or tear ourselves apart about the whole human race, about why that would be. Why are we so ungrateful? Why are we so, this, that? But once you understand this, what you're learning here, our wiring, it all starts to make sense, right? So this is why. Because both are only there to motivate survival and reproductive behavior, right? Your good feelings are only there from the perspective of the one who wired you, DNA, to encourage survival and reproductive behavior. And the bad feelings are only there to discourage anti-survival and reproductive behavior. We'll talk about why it goes wrong soon, right? But for now, that's what it's there for, right? So what's the resolution to this? The key word here is behavior, right? I could have also said action, okay? We only act, as far as DNA is concerned anyway, we only act, we only move out of the inertia of basically doing nothing because either we are seeking to avoid a bad feeling or we're seeking to get a good feeling, right? So if we were pre-wired to just feel good all the time, from our basic perspective, the basic kind of pre-wiring perspective, right? We just wouldn't do stuff that led to increased survival and reproduction, right? We go out and seek food because we are hungry. We avoid threats because they are scary. We take action to reproduce despite the innate difficulties and dangers and sheer effort because of the urge that we feel inside us, because of the anticipation of reward, right? So everything that we do, we only do to avoid a bad feeling and to get a good feeling. And the key word there is do, right? Action. It leads to action. And so if we had a good feelings as a normal thing and we just occasionally felt bad, then, assuming that we are just like any other mammal at least, which is a safe assumption for most of us, then we just wouldn't take action, right? And again, I'm not being disparaging to anyone. This is true of me as well. I've realized that I fundamentally, I'm kind of negatively motivated, right? I do things to avoid things. And that's okay. That's just part of being human. I'm just, attempting to upgrade and change my orientation, and I'm doing well at that, and I feel much better as a result. We'll talk more about that later. But innately, I do things because I don't want something bad to happen. I do it to avoid bad feelings. I do it to avoid punishment, right? Neurochemical DNA punishment, right? So that's the bottom line, right? If we were at peace with ourselves and completely happy, then why bother? Why bother to strive, right? Why bother to resist the predators and threats and disease and anything else? Why seek food? Why seek reproductive opportunities? Why seek all the things you're going to learn about if there is no motivation, if we already felt good, right? So this is DNA's perspective. So DNA keeps us feeling basically bad, so we're constantly trying to avoid feeling worse, and we're constantly trying to get the feeling of good, which doesn't last long, because if it did, then we would cease to act. Does that make sense? Right? Okay? Great. So, as you can probably sense already, here's the bad news. Our wiring is out of date, right? Although so far, admittedly, this is my opinion, but so far, if you actually look at the facts, DNA's agenda is being met spectacularly, right? We are, as a human species, we are more long-living and populous than ever before, right? And we have the actual opportunity of, the possibility at least, of going out there and colonizing other planets and reproducing, potentially throughout the galaxy. Like, we're closer to that now than we ever have been as far as we ever have known, right? So it seems like DNA's agenda is kind of actually working, right? But the wiring is out of date, okay? And this presents a potential challenge, and this is why we're as close to disaster as we are to liberation and spreading through the galaxy. We're also close to extinction at the same time. I personally don't believe that we will reach extinction because of our capacity to focus on the negative and solve problems and focus on what's possible and invent and innovate and all the rest of it. But both are real possibilities, right? The possibility of spreading throughout the galaxy and having an amazing evolution is possible, and the possibility of making ourselves extinct is possible, right? So in that sense, our wiring is out of date, the fact that extinction is a possibility. So the good news is it is possible to hack. I notice hacking is a popular word these days, not just in computer parlance, but also in self-development speech. So it's possible to hack the system that I just shared with you, right? And be more free, empowered, and happy, right? We can actually take responsibility for that reward punishment system. We can take responsibility for our own neurochemistry. We can take responsibility for our own motivation. We can take responsibility for our own survival and reproduction. And we can hack the system so that we do feel basically free and empowered and happy and at peace and all the rest of it, at least most of the time. However, if we don't do the right actions, the bad feelings will start to come up, right? So that's what I mean by taking responsibility. The way I would look at it is if we proactively show DNA or whatever, our neurochemistry, that we don't need a constant stream of bad feelings to motivate us to take the actions that we need to meet the agenda of DNA, then we will go back to suffering as our baseline operating system, right? So it's possible. That's the good news. The reality is most people will not do what it takes to do that, right? Because while the rewards are great, like basically feeling good most of the time, I mean, if you're kind of pre-wired to basically feel bad most of the time, then to basically feel good most of the time, as well as all the other rewards that go with that, right? And we'll talk, I won't reveal them yet, but we'll talk in great detail about those later. But basically, our wiring does, this wiring that I've just shared with you, it's fantastic and it has been fantastic for surviving and thriving in the world up until the way that the world was up until recently. But the way the world is now, that old wiring actually holds us back from surviving and thriving and being successful, right? So there are a lot of rewards, but the basic fundamental reward, because let's face it, this is what it's all about, right? Of hacking that system and becoming more free and empowered, is that we can basically feel good, right? However, most people won't do it because the process is difficult and painful, right? Difficult and painful, requires effort and requires pushing through discomfort. So why is it difficult and painful? Well, I won't answer that in any grand philosophical sense, although you could say that, maybe to evolve or whatever, you have to prove that, that you really mean it, right? Like anything that's worth getting is worth, fighting for or working hard for, or do you know what I mean? Like nothing that's worth having is what, you get for free, that kind of thing. So maybe that's the grand philosophical reason. But the practical reason why it's difficult and painful is that not following through on your programming feels wrong, right? Going against our programming just feels wrong. Simple example. If I tell you the damaging effect of fear and stress in your body, and how it's good for you to focus on everything that you have to be grateful for, and it's bad for you to focus on everything that's wrong, you're probably going to get that. Certainly you are going to get that, right? But if you actually try and do it, if you actually try and stop yourself from getting into anxiousness and worry and all the rest of it, and get yourself to focus on what you're grateful for and what you're happy for, certainly when you first start trying to do it, it just feels wrong, right? It feels wrong, it feels difficult, it feels painful, right? In terms of difficult and painful, but it just fundamentally feels wrong. It's like, it's not me, it's not natural, it's not right, it's not, right? It feels not natural, it feels like it's going against your programming, right? Now, this is the same kind of feeling that you have, for instance, if you were brought up in a very strict fundamentalist religion, right? And then you you hear the perspectives of maybe a scientific person or maybe a different religion, and when you try and take that on, it feels wrong, it feels weird, it feels unnatural, it feels ugh, right? Something like that, okay? Now, as much as religions can be fairly deeply indoctrinated and ingrained in people, especially if you have them from birth, it's still not as much of it's not nearly as indoctrinated and ingrained as the fundamental agenda of your DNA, right? Of your fundamental wiring. So, as much as so for instance, if your parents always told you that, say money is wrong, you may have been working on that already with me, and they fundamentally had that belief, and now the idea that money is actually a good thing, it just feels kind of weird, it just feels kind of wrong, even though it makes sense on a mental level, right? Well, the amount of resistance you feel to something like that, multiply that by 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times for the way that it feels to go against our fundamental genetic program, to go against the tendency to always be in a state of fear and worry and anxiety and frustration, and to start focusing on reasons to feel good, to start focusing on your successes, to start focusing on reasons to feel grateful, to start focusing on all the love that you feel within yourself without seeking it from others, without necessarily seeking it from others, but just to love yourself, all of that kind of thing. It just feels wrong, it feels weird, it's against our programming, right? Think about it, just the love one, for example. It's great to love yourself and honor yourself and respect yourself, but that, from a DNA's perspective, that's not furthering your survival, right? It's furthering your survival to want other people's love and approval, because that bonds you to them and increases if you're in a pack, as almost every mammal, pretty much every mammal except for cats, they love to be in a group, and they feel anxious and threatened when they're not in a group, right? Because there's the safety in numbers, the safety in being part of a pack, despite the disadvantages. We'll talk more about that later. To love yourself and all the rest of it it makes sense, but it feels wrong because, and seeking love from outside feels right, because that furthers the agenda of our DNA. Being in a pack furthers the agenda of the DNA. Obviously to seek to have alliances furthers the agenda of the DNA. To especially seek the love and approval of powerful people feels like it's furthering the agenda of the DNA. To seek the love and approval of people who you mate with and reproduce with furthers the agenda of the DNA. So do you see what I mean? Just one example, but there are many, many like it. So how are we controlled, right? What influences us? Drug addiction, right? You probably felt like I've been a little bit coy here. I haven't, revealed up until now what I'm talking about here. It talks about good feelings and bad feelings. But how do those good feelings and bad feelings actually come about? They come about basically through drugs, right? So if we were to use a street metaphor for a second, if I don't know if pushers really exist, I'm sure a few of them do, but if you were a pusher and you were trying to, that kind of drug dealer was trying to force people to become addicted to drugs, who would be the best target to become, say, a heroin addict and keep coming back to, get their fix from you, and therefore they would be dependent on you and all the rest of it, right? Who would be your best target? A, someone who's genuinely happy, at peace with themselves, feels love, feels connection, has a lot of gratitude, feels good just as they are, right? Or number two, someone who feels weak, powerless, vulnerable, scared, anxious, frustrated, unhappy, unsure of their place in the world, all the rest of it, right? Who's your best prospect, A or B, right? Obviously B, right? And in fact, those are exactly the kind of people who do become junkies, whether they become targeted by pushers or not. So it's exactly the same thing in the neurochemical sense, right? In order to keep you seeking your fix, right? You're going to learn about the fixes, right? There's a few of them. Depending on how you define it, there are 5 primary fixes that all of us constantly are seeking to escape the constant pain, stroke anxiety, stroke worry, stroke frustration, stroke dissatisfaction, stroke whatever you want to call it, the baseline not good feeling that we have, right? There are 5 drugs that we're constantly seeking. And so these are the carrots, right, that motivate most of our behavior. And then of course avoiding the feeling of feeling even worse. also motivates our behavior, right? So you're about to learn all about the drugs that actually influence all of your decisions and actions right here in this training. But first, that by the way is called an open loop. It's an NLP term. You'll learn more about that later. For now, before we can get into the drugs, we have to understand why things have gone a little bit skew-if for us humans, right? Because for every other mammal, for every other animal on this planet, that whole drug situation works great, right? It keeps dogs surviving and reproducing, it keeps monkeys surviving and reproducing, it keeps antelopes surviving and reproducing, it keeps cats surviving and reproducing despite their more individualistic tendencies, right? It works, right, for everyone. And as I said, so far it's worked for humans as well, very well. But of course we've got a challenge with it because we're different. So let's look at how we're different, right? So one way that we are different from other mammals is that we have a protracted maturation period. Now, that's kind of fancy psychobabble speak maybe to some of you. It basically simply means it takes us much longer relatively to get to a point where we are mature, both like biologically in terms of our ability to reproduce, and certainly on a kind of being fully grown, having our brain be fully grown and capable of making its own decisions, right? Our brain doesn't fully form until we're in our mid-20s. There is no other animal on Earth that takes anywhere near that long, right? A lot of animals, literally, you know, including mammals, not just reptiles, mammals, they pop out within minutes or hours. They're walking around, and they're, you know, obviously they're still very dependent on their mother, but you know, basically, if a predator comes, they got to run themselves, right? Like the mother isn't going to pick them up. Primates, obviously, the mother does, but primates are a bit unusual still compared to most mammals. Basically, most mammals doesn't take long at all, right? Our cats, you know, I've got a cat here, 6 months until they're ready to reproduce, right? Human being, right? You know, what? Minimum 12 years, 15, something like that. Very, very long time. And the time to reproducing isn't that relevant. The key point here is the time that they are helpless and dependent, right? We are helpless and dependent far longer than any other species on Earth, right? Now, the benefit of this very protracted maturation, the benefit of the fact that the brain takes such a long time before it's kind of complete, as I said, mid-20s, is that we have a massively increased ability to learn and adapt, right? And this really, more than anything, explains why our species is currently, as far as we know, certainly out of all mammals, I'm not sure it would still be true if you count all microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, whatever, but certainly out of all mammals, we are the dominant species on the planet, right? And we are the most prolific, right? And we are using up more of the Earth's resources than any other animal, right? Now, that sounds like a bad thing, obviously, but from a supremacy kind of point of view, like, you know, most animals wish that they had more resources at their disposal, we would imagine, based on what we understand, right? So it's quite an awesome thing, right? I've talked about this before in my other trainings. The animal that's most likely to survive and reproduce is not the biggest, not the strongest, not the fastest, not the cleverest. It's the one most able to adapt, right? So the fact that our brain keeps growing, keeps changing, even once we reach our mid-20s, it's not set in stone like it used to be believed it was. We still have neuroplasticity. We can still rewire ourselves or be rewired by other people or circumstances. We can still change. We can still grow. We can still develop. That fact alone, and the fact that we have such a long period to grow, so we are less pre-wired than pretty much any other species, and we are more, our wiring depends on early experiences that we have, less we're born with a set, you know, amount of responses, and that's basically it, right? That's what gives us a massive evolutionary advantage. So that's the benefit, or one of the main benefits. The challenge, again, there are many, but I've tried to keep this succinct. The main challenge is an underlying feeling of being vulnerable and powerless, right? Like I said, so, you know, like a horse is born, and within a few hours, if some kind of predator comes along, they'll be able to run away from it, right? Not as well as their parent, but pretty well, you know. With us, how long does it take before we can meaningfully run away from a predator, right? At least a year before we can even stand up and walk for most of us, you know. So it's a long time, right? And, you know, realistically, really, until we can, years, right? So we have a long time of being vulnerable. And you know, might say, well, you know, there are no leopards in the world. Yeah, but there are predators nonetheless, right? There are predatorial people, there are bullies, there are abusers, there's all kinds of, you know, reasons why we have the perfect justifiable right to feel vulnerable in a bad way rather than in a good way. And powerless, right? Again, we're not able to do anything. We're not able to really defend ourselves. We're not able to fight anything off, right? A cat, by the time that it's, you know, 6 months old, is able to fight off a predator pretty much as well as a cat who's 6 years old, right? It's not quite, it's still a little bit smaller, but basically, you know, it's as powerful as a cat is going to be to a large degree. Whereas, you know, a human who is, 2 years old is nowhere near as capable as a human who is 20 years old, right? You're pretty much completely powerless. Your brain is barely formed. You barely understand what's going on in the world, right? Especially the social world, which is the world that matters more rather than the pure survival world in this day and age. So you're clueless, right? You're powerless, you're vulnerable, you're clueless. But, you know, so clueless is more of a mental state, but the point is in terms of feeling, right? Vulnerable, right? Powerless. So what does that make us feel? On a very deep level, it makes us feel fearful, right? Scared. Now, what we understand is all animals feel fearful on an ongoing basis. They feel a high level of, you know, kind of anxiety, which they relieve by stimulating these various drugs that you're going to learn about on a temporary basis. So that's true of all mammals, but it's more true of us humans than anything else. So that gives us an advantage, again, of being more hypervigilant for threats, being more hypervigilant for problems, and so solving them before they come about. So, you know, that's been a benefit. But of course, it's also a great detriment for all kinds of reasons. Whatever you focus on, you get more of. And now we have this thing called media, which means that rather than being able to feed fear on an occasional basis, if, you know, a stranger or a predator or something happened to wander into the tribe, or maybe we heard a strange sound at night, now we can literally just go online or go and watch TV and find reasons to be fearful 24 hours a day. Good reasons to be fearful, no less. 24 hours a day, right? We can totally chronically overdo that one. But irrespective of that, you know, why would we do that? Because of this basic protracted maturation, feeling vulnerable and powerless, feeling helpless, and then, or, you know, not all of us feel that way. Some of us are like, but that's just like a posturing to hide the fact that we feel vulnerable and helpless, right? Which is something that all animals do as well. So it makes us fearful. We're very fearful, right? Number two, and we'll talk more about that later, right? We'll talk more about that on an ongoing basis as the training unfolds. So, number two, way number two that we are different from other mammals. We have a huge cortex, right? Now, other primates have a much bigger cortex than most other mammals, but still we humans have a much bigger cortex than most primates even, and much, much bigger than most other mammals. And we have, of course, the prefrontal cortex, a bit at the front, which is pretty much you know, unique to humans. It's negligible in all other animals, right? So we have a huge cortex, which we could define as the human brain, okay? So the benefit of having that huge cortex, again, there are many, but to keep it succinct, is the ability to abstract, all right? So this is kind of like a meta concept, abstraction. So what does abstract mean? Symbols are abstractions, right? Pictures, language is an abstraction. Mathematics is an abstraction. Geometry, you know, is an abstraction. Laws are an abstraction. Ideals are an abstraction. So a law like thou shalt not, an ideal like a world where everyone lives in peace and harmony, right? Or a world where everyone has all their survival needs met, you know? Like, this is an abstraction, and it would never occur to an animal, any other mammal, who didn't have such a huge cortex, right? So, our ability to abstract. The challenge with that is, and we'll get more into what it does in a minute, but the challenge with having the huge cortex is that we get caught in confusing abstractions with reality. And one of the things I've heard from one of my favorite teachers is that to most people, they act as if words are more real than reality, So like an example for that, for instance, is, if someone in an abusive relationship, like the person is like punching you and hitting you and treating you like dirt, and then they say to you, I love you, and the words I love you, which are an abstraction, are more meaningful than the reality of the fact they just punched you in the face, so it's that kind of thing. That's on a very visceral level. On a kind of big picture level, it's things like building an idea of the way the world should be, right? Which is a good thing. So for instance, you might build an image in your head of a world where everyone gets along and is nice to each other, right? Great. And so that's an abstraction, that's a thought that never would occur to any other mammal, right? So it's great. And it's great because then you can make that happen. You can work towards that. However, people confuse their abstraction with reality, right? The reality is, as we'll talk about more soon, but as I'm sure you already know, people aren't always nice to each other, right? People fight and people, disrespect and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get so caught up in our abstractions that we actually get surprised by reality, right? We get so caught up in the way that we think the world should be, in our abstractions, in our fantasies, in our ideals, that then reality is like upsetting to us, or disappointing, or offensive, or horrifying, or all of these things, right? So the disadvantage is that we get we get too caught up in it, and we either think that our abstractions are real, or so we confuse them with reality, or if we are somewhat aware of reality, then we're very, very upset by the disparity, right? This could be on a world level, but this could be on a personal level, right? So maybe our abstraction of ourselves is that we're a good person with lots of integrity. The reality is that because we want to please people, we keep promising a load of stuff and then we don't do it, right? And so this causes a lot of pain, right? Because the abstraction of ourselves, I'm a good person with a lot of integrity, doesn't meet the reality of a lot of people being annoyed of you for not doing what you said, right? So there's endless challenges with this. I could go on about just this thing for 2 hours, but I hope you get the point, and I really encourage you to consider all of what you've learned here, especially this point, in great detail, right? Because there's endless connotations of this, endless things that come from this, which are hugely impactful. For now, though, I'll push on and address, and this is really the fundamental point, above and beyond all the ways that things go wrong, which is that our huge cortex gives us the ability, to handle reality better. Okay, so what does that mean? It's kind of all the as a man think and grow rich kind of thing. Like your ability to visualize, to abstract, to conceive something that doesn't exist and then make it happen is a huge benefit, and then make it happen in the actual world is a huge benefit, right? On a very simple level, let's say that you have to cross a stream, right, and you don't want to get wet because then you might catch a cold, or you'll be colder or whatever, right? The ability to think in your mind, I could get that plank over there and I could lay it over the water and then I could walk over it, right? That's something that animals wouldn't be able to do. Beavers do it, yes, but then they're pre-programmed to do that, right? The idea of doing it as a new thing which you hadn't thought of before, you haven't seen someone else do it, you had a thought, you had an abstraction, right? That's a profoundly beneficial capacity that has led to us being able to, put a man on the moon and just do the most incredible things, right? On a species level, and definitely, I hope that you feel that way for yourself already. If not, you will do on a personal level, right? However, the challenge is that most of us, or certainly too many of us, use it to avoid and condemn reality, right? So rather than using it to make reality better, we use it to escape from reality, or we use it to make reality fundamentally wrong and make ourselves feel even worse than we're already pre-programmed to feel, right? So it's obviously a big challenge, right? So fundamentally, The biggest gift that this gives us is we can make reality better. The biggest problem is that most of us actually use it as a reason to feel worse and to avoid reality. Okay, make sense? Okay, now all we've covered so far is really important to understand, and I hope it's been of interest to you as well. I find it fascinating. What you're about to learn here is probably the most important thing to understand of all that we've covered when it comes to influence. Okay, so really pay attention. So, all our actions, beliefs, and decisions come from our mammal brain, right? What's the key word there? All. That's what science is pretty conclusively demonstrated. All of our actions, beliefs, and decisions, right, originate in our mammal brain, right, our emotional brain, okay? However, you, I, other people out there, human beings, we live in and identify with our more rational human brain, okay? So can you see already where we've got a challenge here? Both for us to influence ourselves, to have the best life possible, and to influence other people. Can you see there'll be a challenge there? So we live in and identify with our human brain, but actually our actions, beliefs, and decisions come from our mammal brain. Right? Now I know this is challenging. You may not agree with this. You may think that this is not true. This is fundamentally wrong. And you would be wrong. Right? Now, obviously I don't expect you to take my word on this, do the research, but this has been conclusively demonstrated, right? All our actions, beliefs, and decisions come from our mammal brain, right? And from our emotional brain, right? However, we tend to live in, and men are more guilty of this than women, but fundamentally all us humans do this, we live in and identify with our rational human brain, right? Our prefrontal cortex. It gets worse. The two don't speak. They're not on speaking terms, the mammal brain and the human brain, for the very simple reason that the mammal brain doesn't speak. There is no verbal component to the mammal brain, right? So you can be saying in your head like all kinds of stuff like, oh, it'll be really good for me to get up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning and go for a run and I'm going to feel much better about myself and right? It's just words, right? And the mammal brain does not understand words, okay? Ditto, if the mammal brain wants something from you, it wants you to understand something, it doesn't speak to you in words, right? It can't say what it wants. So the mammal brain only feels, right? And it communicates to you, the you part of you, the human brain, in feelings, right? A lot of which may not make sense, which may be irrational, which may not fit in with your ideas, all the rest of it, right? So it gets worse. By the way, at this stage, if you're like, oh my God, I promise I'm going to end this part of the training on a high note, okay? There is a bright side to all this, and it's a very powerful bright side, right? I'm not a pessimistic person, I'm not a negative person. And even though I, completely, this is all 100% true to me, right? So bear with me. If you're starting to feel depressed or hopeless or anything like that, that's just a defense mechanism. Just breathe, listen to the mammal part of you, but pay attention and proceed, right? We're getting to a high note, I promise. So, but it does get worse. There are way more connections from the mammal part of the brain to the human part of the brain than the other way around. And more importantly, and I wanted to highlight this word, there are more controlling connections, right? So the avenue of control goes from here to here, okay? We like to think it's the other way around. This is controlling this, right? This makes the decisions over this. So the mammal decides and acts, while the human believes itself to be in control, but really, most of the time, it just comments, right? I don't know if you've ever watched any kind of sport program, but you know the basic kind of the idea of that is you watch whatever it might be, the game, the football pitch, or all the rest of it, and that's going on, and then you hear these commentators constantly commentating on what's going on, right? But they don't really have any actual influence on what's going on. But you know, often we identify with them strongly, and we love them and their personalities, and we feel as if they're an important part of it. But actually, all they're doing is commenting, right? Like they have no influence as to who wins or who kicks what or whatever, right? And so it's similar with the human part of the brain. It basically primarily comments, and a lot of its commentary is in the vein of complaints, right, and judgments, as well as justifications, right? Could put that in, but kind of similar, right? Comments, complains, judges and justifies, and of course it gets caught up in its own abstractions, right? It gets caught up in its own abstractions. Now, this might all seem very glum. So, as I mentioned earlier, remember, it's possible to hack this system. It is possible to grow, because we have these brains that, right, with the disadvantage of protracted maturation, being helpless for a long time, as a result of that having excessive fear, even by mammal standards. We've got all of those challenges, but we have this brain that is more adaptable and more able to regrow than any other brain. And so we do have the ability to grow. We have the kind of burden of self-awareness, right? So what the rational brain, what the front part of the brain does at its best is it observes, it is aware, right? So we have self-awareness that comes from this new brain. And yet most of the time, all it's doing is commenting on what's going on, right? Complaining, justifying, and getting caught up in memories, fantasies, abstractions of all kinds, right? But what it does have the capacity to do is it has the capacity to be aware, right? So to self-reflect. Now, we call this self-awareness a burden, because if you know how irrational or stupid or self-destructive or crazy or whatever judgment, again, right? Judgment you've got is, but you feel powerless to do anything about it, that is burden, right? So, you know, we look back at maybe an idealized version of people in the past. We look at animals and stuff like that, and we're like, oh, you know, I wish I had that innocence, right? The very first story in, you know, the supposed history of the world, maybe true history of the world if you're a Christian, right? Genesis, of the first thing is of that loss of innocence when self-awareness comes, right? And yes, it's tied to sexuality and stuff, but I would say it's also a metaphor for this flowering of the human brain, right? Like the reptile, the Kundalini force rising up and then growing these new neuronal connections, right? Which give this, you know, burden, curse of knowing how much things could be better and how bad things are, but with the opportunity to actually make things better, right? So it comes back to that point that I made before. So the challenge that we have on a personal development level is the fact that the one actually running the show is the mammalian part of us. The opportunity that we have, it is possible to grow controlling connections from that part that's aware, able to be rational, able to make decisions, right? To the back of the brain, the feeling part that normally actually makes the decisions, where the beliefs actually lie, where actions actually come from, and that really usually actually runs the show. It's not easy. We talked about before, right? It's difficult, it's painful, it requires overcoming a lot of resistance, it requires a lot of overcoming a feeling of there's something wrong, right? But it is possible. However, that's the good news from a personal development point of view. What you need to understand, because this is a course on influence, not personal development, is that the people who you're going to be dealing with, even if they're your ideal clients, generally they're not going to be very far along with that process of growing controlling connections from the front to the back, and they may well not have even started. That doesn't mean that they don't deserve your help. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't help them. And in fact, if you limit yourself only to people who have significant controlling connections from the front to the back, who are not fundamentally driven by their mammal brain, you are probably going to limit yourself to a too small audience. And let's face it, unless you are extremely well developed yourself, you probably don't have a lot to offer them, right? While you do have a lot to offer, if you've There's a saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? Or queen. I love that saying personally. And what I would say is, in the land of people struggling with everything you've just learned about, the person who has realized all this and has developed a few controlling connections from the front to the back is able to provide a lot of help and a lot of value to a lot of people, right? You may not be perfect, you may only be one-eyed, but having one eye is a lot better than none in this metaphor, right? Not to be negative to any blind people. So, you get it, right? This is not all doom and gloom, but we need, in order to influence people, in order to help people, we need to meet them where they're actually at. So let's talk about that. But first, let's address the whole bright side thing, right? So I've only put one sentence in there, but I want to talk on that for a few minutes. So look on the bright side. So all of this, if you take it kind of from a victim perspective kind of way, which again is the natural pre-programmed way, it's very easy to go, oh, this is terrible, Owen. If you believe me at all, you might be, oh, you're wrong, Owen, or I'm resisting, whatever, right? I would encourage you not to do any of that, even though it is automatic and pre-programmed, and to look at the bright side, look at the positive side of all this. What is it? It's to realize, given, let's say, and you don't have to, necessarily believe me about any of this just because I said so, but let's take everything that I've just said on as a possibility that it might be true. So imagine for a second, abstract, use your rational brain, and imagine if it's true. Imagine that it could be true. And so ask yourself, what if, right? And so if it is true, the bright side is, the good news is, we can now look around the world, and rather than being frustrated and disappointed and dissatisfied and all the rest of it, we can go, wow, it's amazing that people are doing so well. It's amazing that there's so much good in the world. It's amazing that there's so much abundance in the world. It's amazing that there's so much kindness in the world. And as you learn about the different carrots and sticks, the different drugs that motivate everyone to do what they do, I hope and I encourage you to just deepen this feeling even more. Wow, considering all of that is the case, isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that we've built societies? Isn't it amazing that we've built civilizations? Isn't it amazing how little violence there is? Isn't it amazing how much cooperation there is? Isn't it amazing how much knowledge there is? And isn't it amazing how much sharing there is? Isn't it amazing how much caring there is? Isn't it amazing how much compassion there is, right? And rather than being continually disappointed that our world doesn't live up to our fantasy in our head, we can start going, you know what? The reality compared to what it could be is actually pretty awesome. It's pretty amazing. And start looking for evidence of that, right? Like I said, whatever your belief is, you will find ways to prove it's right. The thinker thinks, the prover proves. It's a saying from Rob Anton Wilson, who I believe was a pioneer in this whole field that I'm talking about now, although he had limited data compared to what we have now. So whatever belief you want to find evidence of, you will find evidence for, right? But in this case, just consider for a second, if this is actually the truth, wow, right? How amazing. What a lot we have to be grateful for. What a lot we have to be thankful for. What a lot is actually awesome about the world, about society, about civilization, about people. Yes, there are bad things, of course there are. Yes, there are things that could be and should be improved, and never let go of that, right? If you have compassion and you want things to be better, you want to end suffering, you want to end struggle, you want to end all of the bad things, right? The environmental pollution and everything, whatever it is for you, all of that, right? But for a second, you can say, look on the bright side again, isn't it wonderful that you have the capacity to imagine something better, so that then you can turn that into reality? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that a miracle? And so we've kind of come full circle here, and I would share for you for a second. So if you're feeling like you're kind of being talked into or hemmed into a very materialistic kind of approach, way of looking at life that you don't like, realize that's not actually what I'm giving you here, because I would say that given all of this is the case and the evidence looks overwhelmingly like it is, isn't it amazing that we haven't all killed each other? I'm amazed when I really understand how the world works, that we had nuclear weapons since 1945, and yet we haven't all, gone into a nuclear apocalypse, right? Amazing that there are chemical weapons and they haven't been used more often. I'm amazed that there are so many ways that we could kill ourselves and make ourselves extinct, and yet we're, doing better than ever in pretty much all real terms so far, right? I believe, like, looking at all the evidence, not like maybe the materialist atheist scientist would, that this all proves that everything is accidental and happenstantial and there's nothing. I think this almost proves the reality of some kind of intelligent design, right? Like, it's such a miracle that we're doing as well as we are, that there must be something greater than ourselves, which is guiding us. There must be something beyond us. There must be some kind of destiny, some kind of purpose that we're working towards, right? Given the level of, challenge that we have, given the, fairly ignoble roots that we come from, right? So it's not a negative philosophy. It's not a pessimistic one. It's not a materialistic one. It's not any of that. It is a way of looking at life which is accurate, right? It allows you to make accurate predictions, as we said. It allows you to get results. To me, that means it's got, the highest probability of truth. But more than that, it allows you to feel good again. And I've talked about the world so far, but what about you, right? If you accept all this stuff about you, then yeah, okay, you might feel it's a kick in the teeth and a kick in the stomach and, oh, I hate to think that about myself. But if you can, like, ride that and let go of that, maybe you can start giving yourself a break. Maybe you can stop feeling guilty for being superficial and beating yourself up for not doing the right thing. And as you learn more and more, as we talk about all the different motivators, I encourage you to expand on that and increase on that. But maybe rather than feeling like you're not good enough, you can start to realize that given the reality of what you are, you're amazing. The fact that you're here, that you're even watching a video like this, that you're doing a training like this, that you're committed to making the world better and making yourself better rather than being caught up in all the usual BS, is amazing. It is an amazing thing about you, and all of your challenges and all the things that are wrong with you are completely understandable, and it's all the things that are right about you which are miraculous and amazing and interesting, and that are really the thing that's worth focusing on, right? So it is a positive way of looking at the world. It is a positive way of looking at yourself if you take it the right way, which is the way I'm encouraging you to take it. Okay, and let's finish up this part of the training with this. So, as you learn why people do what we do, you realize you are learning how to, and this is the practical point, extension of what I just said. One, you are learning to help people, right? If you're watching this, there's a good chance you've already done my program on how to help people. Can you realize on how what you've just learned here, if you take it on, what if it's true? Imagine it's true for a second. So if you take on what you've learned here, how much you'll be able to help people more, right? If you understand them, if you can approach them with empathy and compassion and understanding rather than judgments and condemnations and stuff like that, right? If we see, wow, it's amazing you do as well as you do, rather than, oh, you're so disappointing, right? How much is that going to be able to help increase your ability to help people? How much is going to increase your ability to help people if you understand accurately why they do what they do, right? Which we certainly haven't finished yet. We're going to go into more detail of that next. You're also learning how to help yourself. And as I shared a little bit earlier, the limitations for that are even less because while your ability to help most people is limited to the degree that they are open to going through the pain, the discomfort, and there's something wrong feelings to move beyond their programming and create those controlling connections from the front to the back of the brain. But you, right? You don't have to help someone else to oversee all their resistance. You can oversee your own resistance, right? Which is easier. And I would say if you want to help people to evolve, right, if we want to use that term, then you have to do it with yourself. Maybe not first, because if you wait until you're perfect before you help people, you'll never help anyone. Just start with yourself and then continue with other people, right? So start with yourself, continue working yourself, and then also start helping other people. And so continue trying to evolve yourself, continue trying to evolve those who want to, which is not everyone. And then help those who don't want to in whatever other way you want to, right? But you can help people whether they want to do this difficult evolution thing or whether they don't, you can help them anyway, right? And I hope it's becoming more and more apparent to you how. And I encourage you to really not just learn something from me, but really ask that question of yourself, right? As these truths sink in more and more, and as you learn more and more about them, and I encourage you to repeat this training, over and over again until it really sinks in, until you get it. Ask yourself, how can I use this to help people? How can I use this to help myself? How can I use this to, yes, of course, the whole purpose of this course, influence people, right? And how can you use it also to influence yourself, okay? So to get yourself to do the things that you most want to do. Now, of course, our primary focus in this course is going to be this one, right? But I'm highlighting these other ones to you for you to realize, you can take what you learn here in terms of this, influencing people, other people, but you can also apply it in all these other areas just as well, even though that's not the primary focus of this program, right? And then, of course, also consider, this is something we'll talk more around the wealth program, so I'm drawing a connection with that as well. Also consider how what you're learning here can help you to add real value, right? Because once you understand what motivates people to do what they do, not only can it help you to help them and influence them, but you understand what real value really is, okay? So real value, fundamentally, I'll reveal it to you right now, is helping people to avoid feeling bad and to move towards feeling good, right? In meaningful ways. And so, of course, that's going to be up to you to define, right? I would say to, temporarily help someone to avoid feeling bad with, some kind of, escape from reality is not a positive way to add value, but it does add value. It's a billion-dollar industry, right? I would say to add value by giving someone something that temporarily makes them feel good, but, doesn't last and ultimately leaves them feeling worse than before is not adding meaningful value, but it is adding real value, and it's a probably trillion-dollar industry, right? So, no, we don't want to do those bad things, but we do want to add real value to people, right? In a way that feels good, in a way that's in integrity, in a way that overall is not just catering to people's immediate instant gratification, at the cost of their long-term well-being and evolution, but we want to do both. We want to appeal to their instant gratification and their long-term well-being and evolution. That's real value, right? Both in the sense of it's real to them in an immediate level, and it's real in a real, intrinsic, long-term value to the world, value to our species, value to life itself level, okay? So, one more question. So, to do all this, which part of a person do you need to address? All right? That question is to see if you're paying attention. Which part of a person do you need to address to help them, to influence them, and to add real value to them? All right? Which part of them do you need to address? Okay? Ask the question before you carry on listening. Okay. If you said the mammal part of the person, you're almost right, right? The truth is, you need to address every part of a person. If you only communicate to the mammal part of the person, then the human part is still going to have an issue, and there's still going to be this inner conflict, and it's not going to be a smooth influence or help or adding real value. But if you address and communicate with and influence every part of a person, which for simplicity's sake we're defining as the mammal part and the human part, then that is where you're going to be able to help people, influence people, and add real value to people at levels that you frankly probably never even dreamed of, and which are going to give you the level of rewards on all levels that frankly might even be hard for you to abstract, that might be hard for you to imagine up until now. It's amazing. So, in the next part of this training, we're going to go into understanding in great detail what people move away from, what they move towards, the biochemical basis of that, and we'll even see at the end of the training how that connects to the ancient, spiritual, esoteric, and religious looking at life as well, right? So that's coming next. The motivators of why we do what we do is coming next. For now, you've already had a lot. I encourage you to really give this some thought, obviously digest it. More importantly though, really saturate yourself in it. I would say if all of this is totally, yeah, I get it, I totally live this already, great. But if it's new to you, if it's difficult to you, like repeat it, try it in the world, look for it, observe it. By all means, definitely do more research. Ask yourself these kind of questions, right? Really immerse yourself in this perspective, really immerse yourself in this worldview. Because once you do, it's going to empower you to such a great degree, both in your own individual evolution and your ability to help people on whatever scale you want to, that it's hard probably, as I said, for you to even imagine now, right? So I encourage you to really embrace this. Doesn't mean you have to believe me unquestioningly, but take it on as a what if, right? Take it on as a, I'm going to try this belief on to see if it's both valuable, useful, right, and true, and see what happens. And that's all I ask, and you'll see what happens. Okay, see you next time.